Hi, I'm Pat,
And I'm Jesse.
and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are diving into something really human, something we all experience, but is also deeply personal, emotional pain.
Yeah, that's right. We've looked through quite a bit of material research, personal stories, articles, all sort of mapping out this landscape of emotional pain.
hmm
What is it? How do we deal with it?
How do we move through it?
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, how it can actually be a springboard for, well, for growth.
Our mission here in this deep dive is to take all these sources and kind of pull out the key insights, the practical ideas, and maybe uncover a few things that might surprise you.
Like the really amazing link between emotional hurt and, well, actual physical feelings.
Yeah.
And how feeling rejected in a relationship can literally feel like being damaged. And also the incredible healing power that's kind of hidden in our own stories.
Okay, so let's start there. To figure out how we cope and grow, we first need to understand the pain itself, right? What did our sources really show us about what emotional pain is?
Well, um, right off the bat, the material makes one thing absolutely clear. Emotional pain is real.
Hmm.
Your feelings, they are valid.
Yeah.
It's not something you should just brush off or try to think your way out of.
And this part I found just fascinating. The research highlighted, I think it was a 2020 study mentioned in the sources. It suggests that emotional pain actually lights up the same areas in the brain
As physical pain, yeah.
as physical pain.
Just think about that for a second. The brain maybe doesn't draw such a sharp line between them as we tend to think. Emotional hurt can be processed in the way that feels, well, very much like a physical injury. It's not just a metaphor. There's some real biological overlap there.
And it's not just one feeling, is it? We often just say sadness when we talk about emotional pain, but the sources describe like a whole spectrum, things like despair, hopelessness,
Yeah,
frustration.
and anger, too. Definitely anger. Exactly. And one psychological view we came across kind of frames emotional pain as something that often comes up from that gap, the gap between what we hope for or expect from life and, well, what life actually gives us over time. It's that ongoing mismatch that can really grind you down.
Okay, so it's real. It's got this surprising link to physical feelings. It's this complex mix of emotions, often born from, hopes not matching reality. But look, we all feel emotional pain sometimes, don't we? When does it tip over from being a tough but maybe normal experience into something that really affects our lives, something that might need more support?
That's a really key question. And the sources give some pretty clear signs to look out for. They suggest it's probably time to think seriously about getting professional help when these painful feelings make it hard to just do your daily tasks, or when they keep interrupting moments that should be joyful, or maybe stop you from enjoying them at all. When they really impair your basic ability to function day to day.
Or impact your relationships.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
When they significantly strain your relationships, both with other people and, importantly, with yourself, too.
So when it moves from being just a feeling in your life to something that's actually disrupting your life,
Okay.
and you mentioned relationships, the material really dug into that specific and often really sharp kind of pain, hurt feelings within our connections.
Yeah, this is where the research got really detailed. Hurt feelings in relationships. They're often linked to something called perceived relational devaluation.
Okay, what's that?
It's that really stinging feeling. The sense that someone you care about doesn't value the relationship or you in it as much as you thought they did. It hits right at that core human need we have for belonging, for security.
That makes a lot of sense because those hurts often come from breaking those unspoken rules in relationships, right? The sources mention things like trust, loyalty, being open, being supportive.
Exactly. When those foundations feel like they're shaking or even broken, the pain can be just intense. And it's fascinating. The one study mentioned showed that when people describe these kinds of relational hurts, they overwhelmingly use words we normally link with physical injury.
Like what?
Words like hurt, obviously, but also torn apart, betrayed, rejected. It's almost like the brain is searching for the closest physical thing to explain this deep emotional wound.
Wow. Torn apart, betrayed. Yeah, that's powerful language.
And that pain in those moments, it isn't just sadness. That same study found it's incredibly common for that kind of relational hurt to be this potent mix of sadness and anger.
Ah, right. That vulnerability mixed with indignation, that adds a whole other layer.
And moving a bit broader than just relationships, the material also looked at emotional trauma. The definition they offered wasn't just about a terrible thing happening, but about an event that overwhelms the nervous system.
Overwhelms it. Huh?
Yeah, and that overwhelming experience can actually change how your memories get processed and stored in your brain.
And it's important, the sources pointed out, that trauma isn't just about huge catastrophic events, right? There's this idea of little t traumas.
Exactly. Smaller things, maybe things that happen more often or are more pervasive, that can still have a really deep and lasting effect on how we feel and how we function.
What kind of things did the sources list as causes?
Well, common ones included things like verbal or emotional abuse, really highlighting that idea that words can hurt.
Definitely.
Also physical or sexual abuse, childhood neglect, even spiritual or religious abuse. Then there are things like accidents, natural disasters, or witnessing violence or someone dying.
That point about verbal and emotional abuse, it really struck me. The sources noted that because there isn't a visible wound, the pain and maybe the shame can be even trickier to deal with. It's a strong reminder about the unseen effects of how we interact.
Absolutely. So, okay, we've got this picture now of what emotional pain is like. It's real, tied to the physical, complex in relationships, and how overwhelming stuff can lead to trauma. The big next question, and where we should go now, is how do we actually cope with all this? What practical strategies did the sources suggest?
Right, this is where we get into the actionable stuff. And one really key area seems to be looking at our thoughts, especially these things called after the comma beliefs.
Yes, this is such an interesting concept. So a painful event happens. That's the first part of the sentence, right? But then what comes after the comma are these often automatic assumptions or generalizations we make.
About the event or ourselves or the future.
Exactly, like my life will never be the same, or, I can never be happy again. These thoughts aren't necessarily based on actual evidence, but boy, can they fuel our distress and keep us feeling stuck.
So just becoming aware of those after the comma bits we add onto reality, that's the first step, isn't it? Catching them and maybe gently questioning if they're really true. That sounds like a powerful way to cope.
It really can be.
Right.
And sometimes something incredibly simple can make a huge difference.
Mm.
The sources pointed to research on just labeling your emotions.
Just naming them.
Yeah.
Mm.
Simply putting a word to what you're feeling, like, okay, I feel fear right now, or this feels like loneliness. That act alone can actually lessen the intensity of the feeling and help you manage it better.
Huh. It's like it gives you a bit of distance, maybe, makes it less overwhelming. And tied into that, mindfulness and grounding exercises came up a lot as useful tools.
They really did. These techniques help you kind of step back from that whirlwind of thoughts and feelings inside
Mm-hmm.
and anchor yourself in the present moment using your physical senses,
Mm-hmm.
focusing on your breath or the feeling of your feet on the floor, what you can see or hear or smell right now. It just gives you a little break, a chance to regulate.
Okay, here's one that maybe surprised me a bit from the research. Humor. The sources actually cited studies showing that humor can genuinely help relieve psychological pain.
It sounds counterintuitive sometimes, but yeah, it can reduce anxiety and help stop that tendency to catastrophize,
Mm.
those negative after the comma thoughts we were talking about.
So it's not about pretending the pain isn't there.
Not at all. They described it almost like a form of medication for the soul. It's about finding a different way to soothe your nervous system, gain a bit of perspective, even if just for a moment. And if finding humor in the painful situation feels totally impossible, the sources suggested just exposing yourself to funny things. Watch a comedy, listen to a funny podcast.
Right, just bring some lightness in from the outside. The material also put together a kind of list of basic self-care practices. These seem especially important for trauma survivors, but really useful for anyone dealing with pain.
Yeah, a toolkit for healing,
Mhm.
essentially. It included things we've mentioned, like mindfulness and grounding, definitely building and using a support network, labeling emotions, finding peaceful spaces.
But also things like tracking your emotions, maybe in a journal, to see patterns.
hmm And actively doing self-care things, like playing, being creative, taking time outs when you need them, or just getting lost in a good book.
These aren't just nice-to-haves then. They're actually fundamental tools.
Exactly. They're presented as basic building blocks for navigating and healing from pain. And while all these strategies are powerful, the sources were also very clear. If the pain is long-term or just feels overwhelming, getting professional support therapy, maybe medication is a totally valid, effective, and often really necessary step. It's a sign of strength to ask for help, not weakness.
Okay, so we've looked at the pain itself and ways to manage it day to day. But what if? What if the pain isn't just something to get through? What if it's actually part of something bigger?
Now this leads us to a really profound idea from the sources. The notion that emotional distress is often an essential part of personal development.
Like growing pains.
Exactly like that. It's likened to physical growing pains. That discomfort can actually be a signal that transformation is happening or needs to happen.
That makes sense. Because real growth, deep change, it's hard, isn't it? It means shifting habits, attitudes, beliefs, sometimes even how we see ourselves. It pretty much always means stepping outside our comfort zone.
Yeah, and the material really pushes back against trying to avoid pain or just slap on toxic positivity. The path isn't around the pain, it's often through it. There's this idea of meeting the pain head on, almost saying, okay, bring it, and surrendering to the reality of the discomfort instead of fighting it constantly. That's presented as key.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult when you're right in the middle of it, though.
Oh, it absolutely is. And a really crucial step the sources highlight for moving through that discomfort is taking ownership of your part in difficult situations.
Not blaming yourself.
No, not in a blaming way. More about focusing inward. So instead of getting stuck on the external circumstances or what other people did, you shift your focus to your own thoughts, your feelings, your actions.
Like, how did I react? How did I respond? What could I maybe do differently next time?
Precisely. It's that shift from feeling like a victim, where outside forces control everything, to feeling empowered, where you see you have agency. That shift is vital for making the changes you want and growing from the experience.
And stepping outside that comfort zone. Yeah, it's painful because you're facing fears, like fear of failure or rejection, but the sources frame it as like a choice between that short-term discomfort needed for growth versus the long-term pain of just staying stuck.
Right. And they really encourage taking tiny steps, manageable steps.
Yeah, powering through challenges, even things that feel impossible when you're hurting, by breaking them down small, getting support, and practicing fierce self-compassion.
Yeah.
The sources say that's tough, but the payoff for your mental, emotional, and even physical well-being is huge.
It's about proving to yourself one small step at a time that you can handle difficult things.
Exactly. And the sources made a really important point about the healing journey itself. It's definitely not a straight line, is it?
Absolutely not. There will be good days and bad days, steps forward, steps back. And crucially, it's not about trying to get back to who you were before the pain or the trauma.
It's more about integrating the whole experience.
Yeah.
The lessons, the changes, maybe even the scars, and becoming this new you.
Yes. Becoming a person who has lived through something hard and been changed by it, hopefully strengthened by it. And self-compassion, especially during those inevitable setbacks, isn't just nice. It's presented as absolutely critical for navigating that nonlinear path of healing.
So, one really powerful tool that kept coming up in the sources, especially for survivors dealing with trauma or really tough experiences, was storytelling. The idea of reclaiming your narrative.
This is such a beautiful and potent concept. The act of shaping and sharing your story, it isn't just talking. It's a way to make sense of things that felt chaotic or overwhelming and weave them into your understanding of who you are.
Is there like science behind why that helps? How does telling your story actually work?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Storytelling pulls in multiple parts of the brain at once: memory, emotion, even the impulse to act. But there's also this thing called mental mirroring.
Okay.
When you tell a story, especially one with real emotional weight, the listener's brain can actually start to sync up with yours. It releases chemicals like cortisol, dopamine, oxytocin.
Ah, that helps explain why stories can hit us so hard.
Right. So for the person telling the story, it helps organize those jumbled memories, regulate emotions, and gain new perspectives by putting the experience into a narrative, like with the beginning, middle, and maybe an end or a lesson learned.
And for the listener.
It builds empathy, connection. It's seen as a really powerful complementary tool, especially alongside professional therapy, of course.
Before someone just dives into telling a really difficult story, though, especially about trauma, the sources really stressed checking your emotional readiness first, and maybe even more importantly, building an emotional safety plan.
Yeah, this isn't just a casual tip. It means actively thinking ahead. Where are my peaceful spaces I can go to if I get overwhelmed? Who is in my support network that I can call? How will I track my emotions through this process? What are my go-to self-care activities I can use? It's about creating a safe container for doing that hard emotional work.
That makes sense. And the material offered some practical tips for actually crafting the story, whether it's just for yourself or maybe just share later. Things like expressive writing.
Like free writing. Just getting thoughts and feelings down about past events without worrying about grammar or structure or judgment. Just exploring.
And for people who've been through trauma or really hard times, a key part of telling the story seems to be reframing it.
Yes, exactly. Shifting from seeing yourself only as a character that things happen to recognizing yourself as the main character who showed bravery, courage, resilience just by navigating those challenges, finding those personal victories, no matter how small they seem.
Seeing your own strength in the narrative. And the advice included things like show, don't tell.
Right. Using vivid descriptions, actions, details to really illustrate your experience, rather than just stating facts. That helps the listener connect on a deeper level.
What about sharing stories more publicly? Like in the media or something, the sources raised some cautions there.
They did. While there can be real benefits connecting with others who've been through similar things, maybe advocating for change, there are also significant challenges to consider.
Like what kind of challenges?
Well, potential safety risks, maybe for yourself or even others mentioned in the story. Legal issues, especially if you're naming people or if there are ongoing court cases. And just the very real possibility of losing control over how your deeply personal story gets framed or used by the media.
So things to really think through carefully beforehand.
Definitely. The advice was, do your homework, ask reporters about their angle, who else they're talking to, understand that online comment sections exist and can be harsh, and always remember you have the right to stop an interview if it doesn't feel right or safe.
And they shared that technique for handling anxiety when speaking publicly, the 3-minute rule.
Yeah, it's a neat little mind trick. Acknowledge the fear is there, but consciously decide that for the next 3 minutes, or 5, or whatever you said, the importance of the message you want to share is going to take priority over the fear.
Just compartmentalizing it for a short burst.
Kind of, yeah. Just long enough to get your voice out there.
The material wrapped up with some incredibly moving, real stories. They really brought home the impact of getting support, going through therapy, and using these kinds of coping and healing processes.
Yeah, they were powerful. We heard about people like Gertrude, who, after grieving her husband, found support in a group and was able to reconnect with her family.
Or Larodo, facing huge challenges from drought affecting her life and schooling, but finding coping skills through group connection.
There was Janet's story, too, finding community after immense loss and health issues, which helped her face her grief and find a resilience she didn't realize she had.
And Chisha, processing the intense pain of losing his best friend in a supportive group, stopping the self-blame, and managing to get back into school and life.
These stories, and others too, like Maureen healing from postpartum depression, Catherine finding ways to manage her emotions in group therapy while balancing caregiving and studying, Kairu turning his life around from crime to business after getting support and reconciling with his father, they aren't just, nice stories.
No, they feel like real evidence, don't they? Proof of our capacity for resilience, the incredible power of connection and support, and the tangible difference that actually engaging with mental health support and healing can make when life throws its worst at you.
They really show us that healing isn't about wiping the slate clean, but about building a stronger, more integrated future from the pieces.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've kind of journeyed from understanding what emotional pain is, its reality, its link to the physical, how it shows up in relationships and trauma.
All the way through to strategies for coping,
Yeah.
the necessary discomfort that often comes with growth, and the really profound power of shaping and sharing our own stories.
It's definitely a complex landscape, but hopefully one that feels a bit more navigable now, with pathways towards understanding, healing, and maybe even transformation. So here's a final thought for you to take away, something to maybe mull over based on everything we've talked about. How might thinking about emotional pain differently, not as something just to fear or avoid or push through, but maybe as a signal, a guide, even a potential catalyst for necessary change, how might that shift your perspective on the difficult experiences in your own life?
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope you found something valuable, maybe a little spark of hope or a new idea here.
Yeah, thank you. We'd love it if you'd like this deep dive. Maybe share it with someone you think could benefit. And please do leave us a comment. We genuinely want to hear what resonated with you.
And please do come back again soon for another deep dive into the topics that really matter.
Goodbye for now.
See you next time.